Hey everybody, Questwise here, back with another video, and I always put together a list of videos of stuff I want to create and make for you guys to watch. And it seems like every time I sit down to make one of those videos, I come across something else that just really wants to be pushed to the head of the line. So today I want to talk about one of my new favorite games. It's one of the games over the last year or so that has really risen to the top of my favorite games ever. I know it's a big thing to live up to, but ever definitely is one of my all-time favorites. Now you'll notice if you watched some of my other videos that I've talked about how I started off with Palladium games and how I have a very, very dear spot in my heart for those guys, and how I spent a lot of my youth playing Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of my adult life playing Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, I still am running some D&D as it is right now. But this game, and this is funny because this game's been around for a very long time, but it's very new to the U.S. So the game is The Dark Eye from Germany. It's been around for about 30 years now, from what I understand from the reading of the history and such online. And this was sort of their take on Dungeons and Dragons when it came to Germany. And so this has been around in Germany for a little over 30 years. It spawned things, everything from the role-playing game to live-action role-playing, to card games, to video games, to board games. It has a huge market over there. Has already been released in English once before, and I guess it didn't really have the reception that they had hoped. They've now relaunched this again. Ulysses Spiel is the name of the company. It's called Ulysses North America. Ulysses North America is the company has kind of taken root here in the U.S. and has begun to produce this in English, in an English version. I want to talk about this in three different parts today. I want to talk about the production, the production of the game, and I want to talk about the style and the gameplay of the game is number two. And then I want to talk about how it measures up to other games in the U.S., especially Pathfinder and or Dungeons and Dragons at this point. So let's start off with production. Top notch. I've never seen a role-playing game quite as beautiful as this, with quite as much attention paid to it to make sure that you get the bang for your buck. That's one of the best things I think about this game from a production standpoint. The level of detail, the level of care put into this as it was being created is phenomenal. The hardcover core rulebook retails in the U.S. for $49.99, which is the same price as a Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook as well. This book is about twice as big. It has little quirk things things that make me really, make things stand out to me anyway. Little ideas that they add. This book has 2 built-in ribbon bookmarks. The binding is sewn and stitched and glued. It's amazing binding. The artwork throughout, it's full color. The artwork throughout is gorgeous. The layout is very, very impressive. Let me see if I can find a cool piece of artwork here. Here we go. A couple of characters there. So the production of this is amazing. And it doesn't just in the core book. It expands beyond that. They've produced this digest size of the core rulebook, and I did check it. It seems to have every single thing available from the core rulebook in a paperback digest size for $20 in US dollars. Again, full color, nice, same layout, exact same text, half the price, and this is great to have extra copies of, especially if you're at the table and you want to, a player has a question, you just hand them this digest size one, and they can look up the answer themselves. That quality also spills over into their other products. This is the Bestiary. This is the Aventurian Bestiary. This is again, full color book, built-in ribbon bookmark, same quality of the binding and everything. Beautiful. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but this is sort of a matte finish in the background, but in the front is very glossy. The creatures are very glossy. Very, very beautiful. They do put it, and I can download these, but the character sheets come in a little pack as well too. These are $5. You get a ton of stuff in here. It's beautifully done. Very, very nice. Full color. A little easier if you want to just have full color ones available, though you can print them off for free from the website. Adventures, again, very cool. Same type of quality. These are paperback, but the same type of quality in production, and again, full color throughout. They also come out, and I'll talk about this in the style and stuff in the gameplay a little bit. This is an introductory solo adventure. Brilliant idea. Very, very cool idea. If you saw my video on peripherals, they also do some of those as well too, and I talked a little bit about those in that video as well. They do come out with the fate chips, what they use throughout the game. Comes in a cool little box. John Pollock has, over Mr. Mean, over his channel, has done an extensive review on all of these, so I'm not going to go into too much of that. What I'm going to talk about to you today is that what I enjoy about the game, what really makes this one of my top favorites as well. So if you want to see more in depth about some of the other books and the bits, go see his channel. There's a bunch of others too, and I'll link those at the bottom at the end of the video. In the comments below, I'll link all the other people who are talking about this game as well. So let's talk about gameplay. Let's talk about style of the thing. Why it's so appealing to me. It is a fantasy role-playing game. It's a basis of the same idea of Dungeons and Dragons. It has its own core world. It's called Aventuria. Has its own background, its own fluff, its own folklore, its own deities. Everything's there that you would expect from a fantasy world. Elves, dwarves, the typical sort of standard fantasy tropes. But does it in such a way that it is new and is invigorating and is fun. The feeling I get from this game is more of a folklore type of history, a more folklore-centered sort of game, as opposed to, say, D&D, where it's a very much more high fantasy, epic fantasy kind of feel. The Dark Eye has a feeling that characters really matter, and that the creatures, while they are some fantastical creatures and magic and stuff pervades the land, there's more of a sort of like mystical background and more of a folklore inspired sort of world behind the whole storyline. Excuse me. So it's more akin to stories of like Ursula Le Guin, Morgan Llewellyn, Robin Hobb, Lloyd Alexander, more akin to those types of stories, as opposed to, say, R.A. Salvatore and Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, Dragonlance, those type of stories. This is more of a folklore where characters are the main focus of the game, and those external sort of mystical, magical things, creatures, spells, wizards, while you can still enjoy them, while they can still be a very active part of the game, they sort of tend to be more drawn from that sort of mythological background. So, what else about this game really, really intrigues me? I think the character creation as well is very, very interesting. It's a point-buy system. It's which makes the characters a little bit more unique to you. You are able to buy like archetypes of characters. So if you want to play a standard fighter, there are those archetypes that you can buy. They're already sort of listed out. All the skills, the standard skills you would get, the standard equipment, the standard stats that you would need are there, and you can just buy that archetype for a certain amount of points. What I also really like about this point buy idea is that you can either ramp up the power level of the game, or you can drastically lower it as well. If you want to play, let's take the Black Cauldron, for instance. Lloyd Alexander did this great series called the Prydain Chronicles, which is based on Welsh mythology, in which a young boy who's an assistant pig keeper goes out and eventually saves the world. And it's hard to do those things with like Dungeons and Dragons where you start at the first level, because the first level in Dungeons and Dragons, while your character tends to be fairly weak, they're still sort of adult characters. What you can do with the Dark Eye is that you can sort of lower the amount of points that you're using in order to build characters and play those younger characters. They will be less powerful. They'll be more akin to, say, like 0 level characters, but still have the abilities to do things, still have skills and backgrounds and those types of things as well, which is really, really nice. I like being able to adjust the sort of power level of your game. If you want to play a more epic, bigger style feel where you're fighting bigger things, taking on bigger plots in the games, you can create beginning characters with higher points levels and still gives them that nice background, full, rich experience that you would get even if you're starting at first level. And again, not really levels in here. Everything sort of changes by point buys and stuff as well. I also liked that the adventure supplements, and I wanted to talk about a couple of these. So this is called the Vampire of Havana. This is a solo adventure. What this reminds me of is when I was a boy playing or reading Choose Your Own Adventure or the fighting fantasy books, some of the akin to something like that. So what this is there's a character already in here that you can use, or you can create one of your own. They prefer that you use more of a roguish style character, as a lot of the tests in this kind of geared towards that. And you play through you read through the first initial, I don't want to give too much of this away if you're going to actually play it, but you read through the initial sort of paragraphs, and then it tells you where to go from there. It tells you what sort of rolls to make. If you want to attempt to pick the lock on the door, you roll your die. If you're successful, go to this page. If you're unsuccessful, go to this page. Very, very, very much like Choose Your Own Adventure, but with more interaction involved in there as well, too. You have a full character sheet, using a full character. You're taking damage from enemies and stuff in there as well, too. What I really like about this, and while there was a few little things you get to and it didn't seem to fit quite completely right, using your imagination, you can make those things. You could fudge those ideas a little bit and make a very enriching story. I played through this twice now. Got two completely different outcomes in my game that I've played. Very, very cool. It teaches you the basic rules very quickly on how the Dark Eye plays. And because the Dark Eye does play a little bit differently, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. The other one I was really, really impressed with, and they've had a few of these out now, Revelations from Heaven. This is a straight-up adventure for 3 to 5 helpful heroes, is what it says on the back here. The adventure modules are so well created that they have everything you'll ever need to run the adventure. There's it's full of wealth of information and background on NPCs. What I also really like about it is that because this takes place in a specific area of the world, and what's really interesting is on the back of every supplement that they put out, there's a map of the continent, and highlighted on here, it shows you exactly where on the continent this adventure takes place. Now, because this takes place in a small village area, it actually goes into detail about like the general store. What does the general store sell in that particular area? So it's not like a bargain between the players and the game master saying, "Oh, can I get a sword at the store? Is there a blacksmith in town?" This tells you exactly what's in that town and what exactly the trade goods are there, what the things are that the farmers grow there, and what's available for sale in the store. And I think that's really interesting. And it makes it kind of a nice place that when you come back, you kind of have an idea of like, oh, let's go back to that store. They had the feathers we needed for a certain whatever. So very, very cool. Again, full color throughout. Immensely useful tools to have in those as well. How does the game work? Let's get into the crunch of this, the meat of this. How do the rules work? They're D20 based, so you'll be rolling a D20 for a lot of the. And I should show you this. They do have some dice that you can buy specifically from them. Again, not really needed, but some really nice dice come in a little pack with their own little dice cup. But you're primarily rolling D20s to make your rolls. What's interesting about the Dark Eye and what I think makes this game really unique rules-wise. And I've heard a lot of people say online, and I've read a lot of things saying it's too crunchy, there's too many rules, there's a rule for everything, it's going to bog down play. It's not been my experience with this game. There are some rules that are different from the standard D20 system, that while they sound on paper, while reading them sound like they could be very cumbersome, in actuality, in actual gameplay at the table, I find them to not be. I find them to be very, very intuitive. For instance, when you roll a skill, when you make a skill check, the example I always use, climbing a wall. Because climbing in other games might just be a strength check. It might just be a dexterity check. In actuality, in real life, climbing a wall or climbing a tree, climbing anything is really more than just strength. It's more than just dexterity. And in the Dark Eye, it is. In the Dark Eye, you must overcome 3 different abilities, 3 different skills, 3 different abilities. So it's 1 skill, 3 different abilities. So you might have to make a strength check, a dexterity check, and an intelligence check on how, looking at this wall, what's the best path to take. You can roll these. There's a little color-coded thing inside the rule book. You can roll 3 dice all at once and then, match them up with the color on the chart to determine what your outcome is. Or you can roll them independently. And this is my favorite way to do this, if you roll these independently, because it's a roll-under system. So you have a stat. If you have a stat of 15, you need to roll 15 or less on the D20 to be successful. I think this builds a lot of tension. It builds a lot of cool gameplay fun in that, you roll your first die and you make it, okay? You roll your second die, oh man, you just barely made it. So you have to make this third one where your this ability fails. Now, not necessarily does it all ride upon having all 3 of these be successful, because you have skill points that are figured out when you're creating your character. Skill points, what they do is that if you fail a roll, say you have to roll a 12 or less and you roll a 14, you can spend those skill points to lower your score, lower your die roll. So you'd spend 2 of them to drop it down. And if you roll a 14 and you need to roll a 12 or less, you would spend 2 skill points to lower that thing. Now, if this is your first roll, you only get a limited number of those skill points per check. So if you only have 4 points available, and now you've just spent 2 of them to lower this, it's going to be risky on these last 2 rolls, and whether or not you're going to be able to sort of lower those rolls to be successful. I think it's cool. I think that's a great, great mechanic. It all gives the player a little bit of a push mechanic, a little bit of an idea that they have a little bit of control over their destiny, but at the same time, it's still very, very risky. And this little idea of rolling the 3 really builds the tension in the game and really adds another layer of awesomeness, I think, to the game. Now, you don't do this with every roll. They're mostly just skill rolls. When you're, in combat, you're rolling just a single D20. Again, lower is better. But you're rolling opposed to another character and to their armor value and such as well too. You do also use a variety of other dice as well too for weapon damages and other assorted things, but primarily the D20. That's how the game is played. Some of the peripherals are really nice. What I really like, again, I'm talking about how sort of grounded in the folklore and stuff that this game is. Again, you can buy packs of cards. The great thing about this is you don't need any of these. You don't have to have any of these to make the game play, because peripherals should be there to only enhance the game. They should never be required, and that drives me crazy when you get a game that has it requires you to have special materials to play. Because I think that just sort of gets in the way. Now, we'll get into that into a completely different video when I talk about Star Wars, the Fantasy Flight version, because they kind of do that as well. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. I think that peripherals should only enhance the game and never take away from the game. So if you can play the game perfectly well without any of this stuff, but if you do have them and have the money to do them, it greatly enhances your experience. And then I just wanted to touch on a couple of these, because I think it's really, really interesting. In games like Dungeons and Dragons, the spells are mostly geared towards doing damage or some kind of other great effect. Because this is a very storytelling based sort of game, and this is a game about sort of telling the stories of characters and their deeds and the places that they live, and interconnection between different characters and NPCs. Many of these spells in other games would be completely useless. For instance, this is a cantrip called Fragrance. It says, you smell like perfume or another pleasant smell for 5 minutes. Now, these are double-sided. That's how I kind of read this. This is kind of nice. You can put these on the sleeves. You can, again, see these all over at John Pollock's videos. Mr. Mean does a great thing about how he's put sleeves on all these. And I'm going to do that as well. It was a great idea. But just for this purposes, this would be a completely useless spell in any other game. In the Dark Eye, this could be extremely, extremely useful. You could use this to your advantage if you're, trying to woo somebody, if you're trying to influence somebody in some sort of a test or a skill, or to talk to somebody. This could be a really useful thing. Another one here, Lucky Fingers. This is kind of a cool roguish kind of spell. You're playing in a card game, a game of chance in some sort of tavern, and you use this spell to draw just the card you need at just the right moment. Again, in any other game, this might be completely useful or useless. In the Dark Eye, these things are very, very influential and enhance the game greatly in that it tells a deeper, more well-rounded story. How does this game measure up? How does this game measure up to things like Dungeons and Dragons stuff? I think it measures up really well. I think this company is growing very, very quickly here in the U.S., and they're gaining a great foothold. They've got a few other games besides the Dark Eye that they're producing right now that are going to be phenomenal. I think that this game needs a good player base to grow. Role-playing games always do best when it's sort of word to mouth. And people sharing the games at conventions and running games and showing people this game, which I plan to do at a few conventions coming up in my area very, very soon. I want to spread the word about this game. I want people to know about it, and that's why I'm producing this video. So hopefully that you'll be able to watch it and share it with some of your friends as well, and get them to jump on the bandwagon as well. The price is very adequate. The amount of quality you're getting for the price of the products is amazing, and sort of trumps what I feel like you can get from, say, Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons. The quality is top notch. Now, the only drawbacks that I have found for this game is you get a few monsters in the core rulebook. A few. You get a couple demons, you get a couple of normal animals. In order to fully... Now, and again, like a lot of the adversaries you're going to come across are going to be normal people anyway, so you're not going to really need fantastical monsters unless you really, really want them. If you do want some more monsters, Aventurian Bestiary is here. Again, this runs for $30 and has a wealth of different creatures in there. Some very, very fantastic ones as well. Again, Mr. Mean does a whole video on this as well, too. You can kind of see his take on that as well. But again, a lot of the adversaries you're going to have are going to be normal people, normal NPCs, humans, elves, dwarves. So those can be created through the core rulebook. The only thing that's bothered me so far about this game is that they talk heavily about the orcs. The orcs have a huge influence. They're very more of a civilized type of a culture in Aventuria, somewhere in this continent, right? There's the orc lands. Nowhere in any of these products are the orcs mentioned. There's no stats for them. There's very little about them. Now, they do have an Aventuria almanac, which goes into the lay of the different lands and stuff. I have not received my copy yet. So maybe they're in there. I'm not sure. But they do talk heavily about the orcs, and they're just not found anywhere else. So if you like what you have heard today, please go out and check it out. This is only $20. Pick it up. If you really like it, go for the big hardcover. But this will give you everything you need to start. In fact, there's even a character sheet in the very back of this, so you can jump right into it that way. I'm going to link all the people down below that are talking about it elsewhere on YouTube as well too. If you have your comments, if you've played it, tried it out, drop your comments in below. And if you'd like to hear more about it, ask me a question. I'll get back with you. I'll let you know what I think about the game itself. All in all, It's just hit my top 5 favorite games of all time. It's really, really piquing my interest, and I can't wait to share it with more and more people. So I think that's about it. Until next time, I'm Questwise, and we're out.